Hello and welcome back to my channel. Bonsoir et bienvenue sur ma chaîne. My name is Muriel and this evening I will be doing a review for The Falling Woman by Pat Murphy. Falling Woman is the story of two main characters, Elizabeth Butler and her estranged daughter Diane. Elizabeth Butler is an archaeologist working at a dig in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, a Mayan site, and she's, an expert in Mayan civilization and Mayan culture. And she's been estranged from her daughter for 15 years because she basically left her marriage. You also learn that she attempted suicide. She's a loner and she feels very isolated and different from others because she can perceive shadows of the past. By that, I mean that, for example, she comes from California. If she were to go out for a stroll after dinner, say, she would see Native Americans going about their, activities, weaving baskets, gathering fruit, building huts, etc. When she goes to the Yucatan, she can see ancient Mayans creating jewelry, weapons, carving obsidian blades, etc. She doesn't really know where that comes from, but it distracts her. It occupies her thoughts all the time, and so she can't really focus on the present and the people living around her in the present. So archaeology suits her perfectly because it allows her to be quirky and a lone wolf and very stubborn and just live her life exactly the way she wants to. But so she has this estranged daughter. This estranged daughter, Diane, comes to Mexico to confront her about the fact that she abandoned her and, what's up with that? Then what also happens on that dig is that one of these shadows of the past talks back to Elizabeth. That has never happened before. She would always see the people, hear them talking, and of course this gives her great insights into her work because she can come up with theories about Mayan culture based on what she actually sees instead of having to guess at it from, analyzing glyphs and pottery fragments. But one day a priestess talks back to her and she realizes, you can actually perceive me, see me. And so an intrigue follows on from there involving Elizabeth, this Mayan priestess, and her estranged daughter. Now, as you can see, this is published in the Fantasy Masterworks collection, but overall this is actually fairly light fantasy. I would say it's more in the camp of magical realism in a way, with elements of historical fiction, because it does, concern itself with Mayan civilization and Mayan culture and ritual. The only real fantastical element is the fact that, Elizabeth can perceive the past and then interact with it in a very specific way. It also really takes a close look at the relationship between Elizabeth and her daughter, at the relationship Elizabeth has with motherhood and, with the past, with the present, and her place in the world, as well as Diane's place in the world alongside her mother. Again, I don't have that much to say about the writing. It didn't really stand out to me, but it was written just fine. It did the job. There were words of Spanish in there, words of Mayan, and, vocabulary to do with archaeology and, the Mayan civilization. So that was interesting in and of itself. The story is fairly straightforward. It is a dual point of view narrative. You have the point of view of Elizabeth Butler and her daughter Diane. You also have a few chapters of a book she's writing on the Mayan civilization. So those were actually fairly interesting because it gives you information on the Mayan civilization. I'm assuming it's fairly accurate, or it was fairly accurate at the time of writing, because Pat Murphy, as I understand it, was a science writer, so I would assume she did her research there. Like I said, this is fairly light fantasy, and what I found most engaging in this novel, what really stuck with me in the end, was the examination of the characters and the characters' relationships. Of course, there are two main characters, but the main character is Dr. Elizabeth Butler. She's not a very likable woman overall. There were times where I was like, dude, you abandoned your child, and now she's, around 30, and she's trying to reconnect with you and understand why you left, and you're just giving her the cold shoulder and also being a wee bit patronizing towards her and just shirking her responsibilities. I mean, she's not technically responsible anymore for her child because her child is an adult now, but still, sometimes it's hard to feel that much compassion for her. But you do feel it as well, because it's clear that Elizabeth for a very long time felt just so different from everyone else, mostly because of this gift, ability she has. And she tried to commit suicide. Her husband, whom she never really loved, it was just a marriage of conformity that she entered into. Her husband committed her to a psychiatric hospital, but under force, and she was treated absolutely miserably. And then finally she left, and she studied archaeology and became a professor and a researcher in archaeology, and that is truly her passion. But it's more than her passion, it's what allows her to just embrace this gift she has, because she can see into the past, and then that gives her great insights into the subject she's studying. She often says she feels more comfortable with dead people than with live people. Now, she has a colleague and very dear close friend who says that that's a characteristic of a lot of archaeologists regardless. So yeah, she fits right in a way. And I really love actually that relationship between her and her male best friend who really loves her, and he's so understanding that she's just the way she is. And yeah, she's a bit rough around the edges, but you got to accept her the way she is. And yeah, so Elizabeth tries to make sense of her place in the world and make sense of, well, her identity as a mother and how that has impacted her nonetheless, and how she wants to go forward in her life with that and the events in the novel. Then you have Diane. So Diane is just a young woman trying to understand what the hell happened in the past, in her personal past. So, I mean, her mother made her profession out of studying the past of, well, human civilizations. But Diane is trying to make sense of her personal, familial past, trying to reconnect with her mother. And despite an estrangement that has lasted for like 15 years, some of the people in the camp remark upon the fact that they're actually relatively similar in some ways. She's a subtle person, she's quiet, she's not always very confident about herself, but I think something very positive about her and resilient. And I really liked her and respected her as a character. I really felt for, well, I mean, everything she endured and felt during this journey she was on. I like the dynamic between her and Elizabeth as well. Like I said, sometimes I was like, Elizabeth, just woman up and, deal with this crap. Because Diana here is kind of collateral damage. And finally, coming back to this secondary character, Tony, who is Elizabeth's best friend. I just loved him. He added, a note of deep understanding and empathy to the whole thing. He completed, in a way, the dynamic between Diane and Elizabeth. Several times he kind of acts as a go-between between the two of them. And he's just a genuinely nice, quiet man, though he also has his own inner demons because he drinks too much and he takes on the pain of the others, and his wife died not that long ago. And Elizabeth has a hard time being affectionate and being open, but you can really sense there's love between them. Doesn't matter whether it's platonic, romantic, no one cares about that. It's just love. I feel like we need more of that in fiction, just more generally, these beautiful, deep friendships that are filled with love, as they should be. I really enjoyed that. Now, when it comes to the world building, so most of this takes place in our world. There's no secondary world building involved. And even with regards to the fantastical element, it's basically Elizabeth seeing into the past. So she sees Native Americans when she's in California, she sees Mayans when she's in the Yucatan. And I mean, I guess the way the Mayans were depicted, also, there's also a character I really didn't go into too much because that just is really linked to the plot, but there's this Mayan priestess called Zuhuikak, I'm not sure I should pronounce that, who's, well, all about not really tempting, but telling Elizabeth that she holds the key to obtaining power, and she's telling her her life story, how her people were conquered by the Toltecs, and she survived that, but then she wanted to enact revenge in a way because they didn't respect her moon goddess and they brought their own gods into it. So there's that whole civilizational shift going on in her story. And all of that was brought to life splendidly. Like, I really enjoyed that exposition of the Mayan civilization. I mean, I generally enjoy stuff like that. I don't read that much historical fiction, but that's the kind of historical fiction that would actually appeal to me, reading about really ancient civilizations, especially Mesoamerican civilizations, which I don't know that much about. So yeah, that was neat. Again, I'm assuming that Pat Murphy did her research on the subject for what was needed for her novel. So I'm assuming it's all fairly accurate. I mean, some of the stuff mentioned in there I've actually encountered in books about mythology, so yeah, I'm assuming it's all fairly watertight. And it was convincing, and it was engaging. It was well realized and brought to life in a perfectly serviceable fashion. So yeah, that's all I can really say about that. As with Unquenchable Fire, which I read just 10 days ago now, when I was reading this, I was like, well, there's not that much plot in here. There's not that much happening overall. You feel like there's something building up, but without spoiling anything, I didn't feel it really went much of anywhere. But something about this novel stuck with me, and it's because the themes in there are actually pretty deep, but they're about human emotions and human relationships, and the Mayan civilizational plot and the whole Elizabeth conscience of the past just kind of serves to prop those themes up in a way, but it was very well done. So one of the first themes I would like to touch upon is that of sanity, because of course, well, there's discussions about Elizabeth's suicide attempt. I mean, there's a lot of imagery involving blood and self-harm. If you're sensitive to that, well, be aware that it's in there. Like, if we are talking about the Mayans, like, they weren't sacrificing people every other day, but that was part of their culture. So obviously it's mentioned. But so Elizabeth can see into the past, and obviously people, or I mean her husband, I guess she told him, thought she was crazy. And when she mentioned that to the psychiatrist at the hospital, they thought she was crazy or schizophrenic, delusional, etc. Just like, why is it that crazy? There's like an analogy made between animistic shamans and the Mon shamans that are psychiatrists, and she's, I'd rather have my shamans with the rattles and the feathers and the drums than those in white coats with, you know, needles and pills. And the point that, well, who gets to define what sanity is? Society defines what is crazy or sane, and if you change culture or time, well, that may change as well. So in a society like the Mayans, she could be considered a visionary, a priestess, a shaman, and not insane for actually peering through the veil of time. So I enjoyed that discussion. It's a complex discussion. Of course, you could develop it much further than in this novel, but still, I liked its presence in there. Second theme is that of motherhood. I think that's pretty important to the novel. Elizabeth's relationship with her daughter and her relationship with the identity and role of motherhood itself. And also the priestess she talks to and interacts with, Zuhui Kak, was also a mother, and something happened with her child. So she kind of serves as a mirror for Elizabeth's own experience, her own feelings, her own questioning of her relationship with her daughter and with motherhood, and what does it mean to be a mother, to love your child, what really binds you to your child. Here too, it's the bond between a mother and her daughter specifically, and that is directly mirrored with the Mayan priestess as well. So usually, I mean, motherhood narratives don't really speak to me, but here I think what I found interesting is that Elizabeth didn't really want to be a mother. She married her husband because that was what you did, and she was trying to conform and to suppress her nature and be normal, and she had a kid. Now, ideally, you should think a bit more about having a child because it has consequences on an innocent human being. But yeah, she didn't really want to be a mother. She's not a very maternal person, but she does love her daughter. I think that was an interesting examination of, well, that situation. So yeah, motherhood narratives don't really usually speak to me, but in this case, it's not so much about obsessing about having a child or raising a child. It's more about the aftermath of estrangement and the maternal relationship with an adult child. So it's a different dynamic, and I find that more interesting. And finally, a more subtle or diffuse theme would be identity and belonging, because, well, once again, Elizabeth feels very different from others and isolated and just out of place, because fundamentally she's in between places. She doesn't entirely belong to the present, at least not in her mind. You can't really say she entirely belongs in the past either, because she's not a Mayan. She might be very interested in the Mayans. She might feel at home at the dig sites and in the Yucatan, studying potsherds and ruins and glyphs and stuff, and seeing with her own eyes. ancient Mayans or ancient Native Americans going about their daily lives. But she's not one of them either in a real way, in a real sense. But that in-between place is also interesting because that's traditionally the place of, well, the shaman, or by extension, some priests, especially in pagan systems of belief, because those are people who connect the world of the living, of matter, with the world of the dead, of the spirits, of the gods. So by definition, those are people who live in between the different worlds, the walkers between the worlds. So in that sense, she is kind of a shaman, and the priestess Zuikak says, you are a priestess. You and I are of the same kind. We're the same kind of people. We have the same function. But, well, in Elizabeth's time, she converts that into being an archaeologist and a professor. And now I'll be reading some quotes from The Falling Woman. I have grown used to my ghosts. It's no worse, I suppose, than other disabilities. Some people are nearsighted, some are hard of hearing. I see and hear too much, and that distracts me from the business at hand. I prefer my shamans with all the window dressing. Give them rattles and incense and bones to throw. Take away their books. Let the white-coated shamans of the modern world chase shadows in the darkness. There are sensations so great that the body cannot contain them. We label these feelings pain for lack of a better word. The Maya recognized that what they made with the permission and protection of the gods. It was only temporarily theirs. In the end, it belonged to the gods. Our society tends to regard the Monte, the wilderness, as an enemy. Christians battled and subdued the wilderness. The Maya have a much saner way of looking at the world, I think. I kept a barrier between myself and the darkness. That was what kept me sane. If that barrier were breached, I knew the world would be swept away in a great bloody flood of emotions. In the end, the grand movements of civilizations matter little. What matters is the skull of a child beside the skeleton of its mother. So, in the end, like I said, I don't think there's that much going on with the plot of The Falling Woman, but there's something deep about it, something that touches you, really that touched me, that moved me with the relationships, with its look at human psychology, or at least a specific aspect of it. I didn't really go too much into it because I don't feel like it, but there's also, like I said, there is mention of suicide attempts, of ritualistic self-harm, of sacrifice, a lot of imagery to do with cutting and blood, and how to control and deal with emotional pain and feelings of alienation, which has to do with the theme of sanity and insanity, which I did talk about. That specific imagery really talked to me on a very, very personal level, but I didn't really want to go too much into it because that's very personal. But also, yeah, like I said, keep in mind, if you're sensitive to that kind of imagery, well, keep in mind it's in there, definitely. I wasn't sure I was going to rate it that high, but I think, yeah, it's a solid 7 out of 10. Solid, perhaps even a 7.5. But I was surprised. I didn't expect that going into it. I would recommend this, especially if you're like into, well, very, very light, fantastical, historical fiction elements in your stories, and you're into Mesoamerican cultures. I'm sure there are novels that go way further with that, but it's a good little taste of that in any case. And it's a fairly short novel, so you can get through it fairly quickly too. And that concludes my review for The Falling Woman by Pat Murphy. If you've read it, please do share your thoughts in the comments down below. Hope you all have a lovely day or evening, and I shall see you in the next video for my monthly wrap-up. Bye-bye.